The champagne bottle slipped from my trembling fingers and shattered against my kitchen floor, but I barely heard the crash over the sound of my son's voice on the phone saying, "Make it look like an accident. Something quick, clean, untraceable." For 30 seconds, I stood frozen in my 62-year-old body, clutching the winning lottery ticket worth $30 million, listening to my only child hire someone to murder me. The man I'd raised, loved, and sacrificed everything for was calmly discussing the best methods to eliminate his mother, so he could inherit my fortune before I even had a chance to spend it. Where are you watching from today? Drop your location in the comments below and hit that like and subscribe button. Let me back up to explain how I got here. Standing in my modest Springfield kitchen on this Tuesday evening in September, eavesdropping on a conversation that would change everything I thought I knew about my family. My name is Margaret Foster, though everyone calls me Maggie. And until exactly 47 minutes ago, I was just another working-class woman counting down the days until retirement. I'd spent the last 23 years as a bookkeeper at Henderson's Auto Parts, living paycheck to paycheck in the same 3-bedroom house where I'd raised my son, Ryan, after his father walked out when he was 12. Not exactly the American dream, but it was my life, and I'd made peace with its limitations. Then came the phone call that changed everything. "Mrs. Foster, this is Jennifer Williams from the Illinois State Lottery. I'm calling to inform you that you're the sole winner of last night's Mega Millions jackpot. Congratulations. You've just won $30 million. I'd bought that ticket on impulse during my weekly grocery run using the same numbers I'd played for 15 years. Ryan's birthday, my wedding anniversary, and my mother's birth year. $5 that I could barely afford. Thrown away on a dream that seemed as distant as Mars. But apparently dreams sometimes come true. Even for women like me who'd learned to expect disappointment around every corner. After Jennifer from the Lottery Commission walked me through the next steps and scheduled my appointment to claim the prize, I did what any mother would do. I called my son to share the incredible news. That's when everything went sideways. Ryan didn't answer his phone, which wasn't unusual since he worked long hours at his construction company. But I was too excited to wait. So I drove the 20 minutes to his house in Riverside, the upscale neighborhood where he lived with his wife Amanda, in a house that cost more than I'd make in 5 lifetimes. I let myself in with the spare key he'd given me years ago, planning to surprise him with champagne, and the news that would change both our lives forever. I heard voices coming from his home office and walked quietly down the hallway, not wanting to interrupt if he was on an important business call. That's when I heard words that turned my blood to ice. "The timing couldn't be more perfect, Marcus. She just won $30 million, which means we need to move fast before she starts spending it or, God forbid, decides to donate it to some charity for stray cats or something equally ridiculous." My hand froze on the doorknob as I realized Ryan was talking about me. "How do you want to handle this?" Another voice asked. Marcus, apparently someone I didn't recognize. "Make it look natural. Maybe a home invasion gone wrong or a car accident. She's old. Drives that piece of junk Honda. Shouldn't be too hard to arrange something believable. The insurance will just see another elderly woman who couldn't handle the stress of sudden wealth." I pressed my ear closer to the door, my heart hammering so loud I was afraid they'd hear it. "What about the wife?" Marcus asked. "Amanda doesn't know about any of this and she never will. As far as she's concerned, Mom had a tragic accident just when life was getting good for her. Amanda's got a soft heart. She'll probably want to start a memorial fund or something touching like that." The casual way he discussed my murder, like he was planning a weekend barbecue, made my knees nearly buckle. This was my son, the baby I'd nursed through pneumonia, the teenager I'd worked double shifts to keep in college, the young man I'd co-signed loans for when he started his business. "When do you need this done?" Marcus asked. And I realized I was listening to the kind of conversation that happened in crime movies, not in real family homes in suburban Illinois. "Soon as possible. She's claiming the prize Thursday morning, which gives us maybe 48 hours before the money hits her account. And she starts feeling generous toward distant relatives or worse. Decides to enjoy her golden years traveling the world." There was a pause. Then Marcus said something that made my blood run cold. "My fee is $200,000. Half up front, half when it's done." "Done." Ryan agreed without hesitation. "Though honestly, Marcus, I'd pay double that to finally be free of her constant disappointment and guilt trips. I backed away from the door on shaking legs, my mind reeling. This wasn't just about money. There was real hatred in Ryan's voice when he talked about me. Years of resentment I'd apparently been too naive to see. Moving as quietly as possible, I slipped out of the house and sat in my car for 10 minutes trying to process what I just heard. My son, my baby, wanted me dead. And he was willing to pay a professional to make it happen. The strangest part was that beneath the terror and heartbreak, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Crystal clear focus. For the first time since my divorce, I knew exactly what I needed to do. But first, I needed to get home and start planning. Because if Ryan thought I was just going to roll over and die quietly for his convenience, he was about to learn that his mother had more fight left in her than he'd ever imagined. The drive home took forever and no time at all. My mind spinning between disbelief and cold calculation. 24 hours ago, my biggest worry was whether I could afford to fix the rattling noise in my Honda's exhaust system. Now I was planning how to survive a murder plot orchestrated by my own flesh and blood. I parked in my driveway and sat for a moment, staring at the house where Ryan had learned to ride a bike, where I'd bandaged his scraped knees and helped him with algebra homework. The same house where he'd apparently decided I should die, so he could inherit my lottery winnings without the inconvenience of waiting for nature to take its course. Inside, I poured myself 3 fingers of the bourbon I kept for special occasions, and tried to think like someone whose life depended on making the right choices. The lottery ticket sat on my kitchen counter like evidence of a crime I hadn't committed yet. My phone rang and Ryan's name appeared on the screen. For a moment, I considered not answering, but curiosity won. Mom. Hey. I just got your message about having exciting news. Sorry I missed your call. I was tied up in a meeting. A meeting? That's what he called planning my assassination. Oh, it's nothing that can't wait, I said, surprised by how normal my voice sounded. Just some paperwork thing with my retirement account. Paperwork can be so overwhelming at your age, he said with what I now recognized as fake concern. Maybe I should come over this weekend and help you sort through everything. Make sure you're not getting confused about anything important. Confused? Like I was some doddering old fool who couldn't handle basic finances. Like I hadn't been balancing books for 2 decades while he was learning to tie his shoes. That's sweet of you, honey. But I've got it handled. I know you think you do. But these things can be complicated. What if you make a mistake that costs you money? What if I stay alive long enough to actually spend my money? You mean I'll call you if I need help? I said, how's Amanda? She's great. Working late at the hospital again tonight. Which is why I'm just getting your message now. Perfect alibi, I thought. Amanda would be at work during her husband's business meetings with assassins. After we hung up, I sat at my kitchen table with a legal pad and started making lists. Things I knew, things I needed to find out, people I could trust, resources I had available. The truth was, I didn't have many allies. Most of my friends were coworkers, and while they were nice enough, they weren't the kind of people you'd ask to help fake your death. My sister lived in Oregon, and we talked maybe twice a year. My mother had passed 5 years ago, but I had one advantage Ryan didn't know about. 43 years of watching crime shows and reading mystery novels had given me a pretty good education in how these things worked. Plus, 23 years as a bookkeeper meant I understood money trails, paperwork, and how to make things look legitimate on paper. The key was making this look authentic enough to fool everyone, including Amanda, while giving myself time to figure out how to turn the tables on my darling son. I spent the next hour researching boat accidents on Lake Springfield. Surprisingly common, especially in the fall, when the weather turned unpredictable. Bodies were sometimes never found, which would be perfect for my purposes. Then I called my cousin Jerry, who lived up in Wisconsin and owned a small marina. Maggie, haven't heard from you in ages. How's retirement treating you? Actually, Jerry, I'm not retired yet, but I'm thinking about taking a little vacation. Maybe renting a small boat for a few days on one of your lakes up there. Something quiet and private. Sure, I can set you up with something. When you thinking of coming up? Maybe this weekend. I know it's short notice, but I'm feeling spontaneous. Jerry laughed. Good for you. Life's too short to wait around for the perfect moment. If only he knew how literally I meant that. After we worked out the details, I called in sick to work for the rest of the week. 23 years of perfect attendance had earned me some credibility with my boss, who told me to take care of myself and not worry about anything at the office. Next, I drove to the bank and withdrew $5,000 in cash from my savings account. Not enough to trigger any reporting requirements, but enough to handle whatever I'd need for the next few days. The hardest part was going to be the emotional performance I'd need to give when I claimed my lottery prize Thursday morning. Ryan would be expecting me to call him immediately with the good news, probably planning to console his grieving mother right up until Marcus did whatever Marcus did to people for $200,000. But I had a different script in mind. Wednesday evening, I packed a small suitcase with enough clothes for a week, threw in my passport and birth certificate and loaded everything into my Honda. To anyone watching, it would look like I was going away for a long weekend, maybe to visit family, which in a way I was. I was going to visit the family member who'd betrayed me, taught him a lesson about underestimating his mother. At 9 p.m. I called Ryan one last time. Nay. I'm heading up to Wisconsin tomorrow to visit cousin Jerry for a few days. You remember Jerry, right? The one with the boats. Wisconsin. That's kind of sudden, isn't it? I've been feeling restless lately, and Jerry invited me up to see his new marina. I thought it might be nice to get away from everything for a while. There was a pause, and I could practically hear Ryan recalculating his timeline. Mom, maybe you should wait a few more days. I was planning to come over this weekend to help you with those financial papers you mentioned. The papers can wait. This is just a short trip to clear my head. Well, be careful driving up there. The weather forecast looks pretty rough for this weekend. How thoughtful. My son was concerned about road conditions while simultaneously arranging for my permanent removal from them. I'll be careful, I promised. Jerry's got a nice little cabin right on the water. I'm planning to rent one of his boats and do some fishing. Maybe some thinking. Fishing. Since when do you fish? Since I decided I've spent too many years sitting around waiting for life to happen to me. Another pause. Mom, are you feeling okay? You sound different. Different. Well, discovering that your child wants you dead does tend to alter your perspective on things. I'm feeling better than I have in years, actually. Like, I'm finally ready to start living instead of just surviving. That's good, I guess. Just promise me you'll be careful around the water. You're not exactly an experienced boater. Don't worry, sweetheart. I've got everything planned out perfectly. And I did. By Sunday evening, Maggie Foster would be officially dead. Her body lost somewhere in the dark waters of Lake Geneva. But the woman who emerged from those waters would be someone entirely different. Someone with $30 million, a new identity, and a very specific agenda regarding her ungrateful son. Ryan had no idea what kind of storm he'd just unleashed. Thursday morning arrived gray and cold. Perfect weather for claiming a life-changing lottery prize and beginning my own death. I dressed carefully in the navy blue dress I'd worn to my mother's funeral, seemed appropriate for the occasion, and drove to the Illinois Lottery Commission headquarters in Chicago. The whole process took 3 hours of paperwork, photos, and interviews with officials who kept congratulating me on my incredible luck. If only they knew how unlucky I was feeling. Mrs. Foster, you're our biggest winner this year, said Jennifer Williams, the woman who'd called me with the news. $30 million after taxes. Have you given any thought to how you'd like to handle your winnings? I smiled the way I imagined a shocked grandmother should smile. Honestly, I can barely believe this is real. I keep thinking I'm going to wake up and find out it's all been a dream. It's very real, she assured me. The money will be transferred to your designated account within 48 hours. You might want to consider speaking with a financial advisor about investment options. My son Ryan works in construction. He's good with numbers. I'm sure he'll help me figure out the best way to handle everything. Jennifer beamed. How wonderful to have family support during such an exciting time. Family support, right? I called Ryan from the parking lot, knowing he'd be waiting for this call. Mom, how did it go? Oh my goodness, Ryan. I can barely speak. $30 million. Can you believe it? That's incredible. Absolutely incredible. When does the money get transferred? They said 48 hours. By Saturday morning, I'll officially be a millionaire. I paused for effect. 30 times over. This is amazing news. Listen, why don't you cancel that trip to Wisconsin? We should celebrate properly. Maybe go out for dinner tonight. Actually, I think getting away for a few days is exactly what I need. This is all so overwhelming, and Jerry's place is so peaceful. I need some quiet time to process everything that's happening. But Mom, there are probably things you need to take care of right away. Legal stuff, financial decisions, nothing that can't wait until Monday. The lottery people said I don't have to make any major decisions immediately. I could hear the frustration in his silence. His timeline was getting messed up, and he didn't know how to fix it without sounding suspicious. Well, okay, but please be extra careful driving and call me when you get there so I know you arrived safely. Of course, sweetheart. I love you. I love you too, Mom. The lie came so easily to both of us. I drove home, loaded my car with the things I'd need, and left a note for my neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, asking her to collect my mail and water my plants while I was gone. Then I headed north toward Wisconsin, taking back roads and paying cash for gas to minimize my digital trail. Jerry's marina was exactly as I remembered from my last visit 10 years ago. A dozen weathered docks stretching into Lake Geneva, surrounded by the kind of dense woods that could hide secrets for decades. Jerry himself looked older, but still had the same easygoing manner that made him perfect for my purposes. Maggie, look at you. You look great. Ready for some time on the water? More than ready. I need to get away from everything for a while. He showed me to the cabin I'd rented, a one-room structure with a small kitchen and a dock right outside the back door. Perfect for a woman who needed to disappear without anyone asking too many questions. Weather's supposed to turn rough Saturday night, Jerry warned. Might want to keep the boat close to shore if you go out then. I'll be careful. Friday passed quietly. I took the small motorboat Jerry had rented me out for a few hours, getting familiar with its controls and testing how far from shore I could get before losing sight of land. I also scouted the eastern shore of the lake, finding a secluded cove where someone could beach a boat without being seen. That evening, I called Ryan to check in. How's the fishing, Mom? Peaceful. Very peaceful. The water is beautiful, and Jerry's been showing me all the best spots. That's great. Listen, I've been thinking about what you said about this being overwhelming. Maybe when you get back, we should sit down together and make a plan for your money. You know, investments, maybe setting up some trusts, that kind of thing. That sounds very responsible. I just want to make sure you're protected. There are a lot of people who might try to take advantage of someone in your situation. Someone like your hired assassin, you mean? I appreciate your concern, Ryan. You've always looked out for me. I always will, Mom. That's what family is for. Saturday morning, I made my final preparations. I drove to a thrift shop in the next town and bought clothes in a different size and style than I normally wore. I purchased a cheap cell phone with cash and spent an hour setting up new email accounts using the free Wi-Fi at a coffee shop. Then I went shopping for supplies. Waterproof bags, emergency flares, a small inflatable raft, and most importantly, a mannequin from a store that was going out of business. The teenager selling it looked at me strangely when I asked if they had any wigs, but he took my cash without asking questions. That afternoon, I dressed the mannequin in my clothes, complete with my wedding ring and the locket Ryan had given me for my 60th birthday. In the growing darkness, from any distance it would look exactly like me. I called Ryan one final time at 7 p.m. Hi, honey. I'm about to take the boat out for some evening fishing. Jerry says the fish bite better just before dark. Be careful out there, Mom. The weather forecast still looks pretty rough. I'll stay close to shore. Don't worry so much. I can't help it. I love you. I love you too, sweetheart. This time, only one of us was lying. At 8:30, as the last light faded from the sky, I launched Jerry's boat with my mannequin passenger positioned at the steering wheel. I wore a wetsuit under my clothes and had waterproofed bags containing cash, identification documents, and everything I'd need to start my new life. 2 miles from shore, in the middle of the lake, I triggered the emergency flares I'd rigged to the boat's gas tank. The explosion lit up the darkening sky like a second sunset, sending debris flying in every direction. I slipped into the cold water and watched my old life burn against the night sky. By the time the Coast Guard reached the scene, There would be nothing left but scattered wreckage and no sign of Margaret Foster's body. Because Margaret Foster had just died in a tragic boating accident, leaving behind a grieving son and $30 million. But the woman swimming toward shore in the darkness was someone entirely different. Someone with a very specific plan for how that money was going to be spent. The water was colder than I'd expected. And by the time I reached the secluded cove on the eastern shore, my teeth were chattering despite the wet suit. I dragged myself onto the rocky beach and lay there for a moment, watching the distant glow of emergency vehicles racing toward my burning boat. It was done. Margaret Foster was officially dead, lost in a tragic accident that would dominate local news for exactly as long as it took for the next story to come along. I changed into the dry clothes I'd hidden in the waterproof bags, and made my way through the woods to the parking area where I'd left my backup car. A 15-year-old Toyota Camry I'd bought with cash 3 days earlier from a private seller, who didn't ask for anything more than a name and signature. The drive to Milwaukee took 2 hours, giving me plenty of time to think about what came next. By now, Jerry would have called the authorities about his missing guest. Ryan would get the call sometime Sunday morning, probably while he and Amanda were having coffee and reading the newspaper. I wondered how convincing his grief performance would be. My first stop was a 24-hour storage facility where I'd rented a unit under my new name, Patricia Williams, a widow from Iowa looking to relocate closer to her grandchildren. I'd spent considerable time creating this identity, using techniques I'd learned from those crime shows Ryan used to tease me about watching. Inside the storage unit were clothes that fit my new persona, documents that established my history, and most importantly, a bank account with enough starter funds to rent an apartment and buy a car. Patricia Williams might not have $30 million yet, but she had enough to live comfortably while she figured out how to claim her inheritance. I checked into a modest hotel near the airport using Patricia's credit card, and spent Sunday morning watching news coverage of my own death. The reporter was a young woman who clearly considered this a minor story. Elderly tourist loses control of boat in rough weather. Body presumed drowned. Family asks for privacy during difficult time. They interviewed Jerry briefly. He looked genuinely shaken as he described me as a quiet lady who seemed sad about something, but didn't want to talk about it. Perfect. Even Jerry believed the story I'd constructed. At 11 sub, my phone, Margaret's phone, which I'd waterproofed and brought with me, rang with Ryan's number. For a moment, I considered not answering, but curiosity about his performance won out. Is this Mrs. Patterson? Ryan's voice was carefully controlled, like someone trying to hold it together during a crisis. No, this is Margaret Foster. Who's calling? There was a pause. I'm sorry. I think I dialed the wrong number. I was trying to reach my mother's neighbor. Interesting. He was calling Mrs. Patterson to ask about me, probably wanting to establish a timeline for when people last saw me alive. I hung up and immediately called my own voicemail from a hotel phone, curious to hear what messages had accumulated. Mom, it's Ryan. The Coast Guard called me this morning about a boat accident. Please call me back as soon as you get this message. Mom, it's me again. I'm driving up to Wisconsin now. Jerry says you went out fishing last night and never came back. Please call me. Mom, I need to hear your voice. They found pieces of Jerry's boat, but no sign of you. I can't handle this. Please call me back. He was good. If I didn't know better, I'd almost believe he was genuinely distraught. The fourth message was from Amanda. Margaret. It's Amanda. Ryan is beside himself with worry. We're both praying you're okay, and just stranded somewhere. Maybe hurt but alive. Please call if you get this. Amanda sounded genuinely upset, which confirmed that she wasn't part of Ryan's plan. My daughter-in-law was innocent, just a woman who thought she'd lost her mother-in-law in a terrible accident. I almost felt sorry for her. Monday morning brought a new challenge. Figuring out how to access my lottery winnings without revealing that I was still alive. $30 million doesn't just disappear when someone dies. It becomes part of their estate, subject to probate court and inheritance laws. I spent hours researching estate law at the Milwaukee Public Library, using their computers to avoid leaving digital traces on any device connected to my new identity. The picture that emerged was complicated, but not impossible. As Ryan's only living parent, and with no will specifying otherwise, he would inherit my entire estate once I was declared legally dead. In cases where no body is recovered, that process typically takes 7 years unless a judge accepts compelling evidence of death, but lottery winnings were treated differently. Since I'd officially claimed the prize but died before receiving it, the money would likely be transferred to my estate relatively quickly, especially with clear evidence of accidental death. Ryan probably knew this. He'd certainly had time to research it while planning my murder. The question was, could I get to the money before he did? Tuesday afternoon, I drove to a law office in downtown Milwaukee and made an appointment with a lawyer named David Chin using my Patricia Williams identity. Ms. Williams, how can I help you today? I need some advice about a rather unusual inheritance situation. My sister died recently in an accident, and there are some complications with her estate. I spun a carefully constructed story about a family member who'd won the lottery but died before collecting, leaving behind a son who might not be the most trustworthy heir. I asked about legal options for challenging inheritance distributions, particularly in cases involving suspected foul play. David Chun listened carefully, taking notes. These situations can be complex, especially when large amounts of money are involved. Do you have any concrete evidence of wrongdoing? Not yet, but I'm working on it. If you can document suspicious circumstances surrounding your sister's death, there are legal avenues for challenging the inheritance. The key is timing and evidence. How much time do I have? That depends on several factors, but generally speaking, you'd want to act within the first few months after the death is officially recorded. Once the estate is settled and assets distributed, it becomes much harder to challenge. I thanked him for his time and paid his consultation fee in cash. As I left his office, I was already formulating the next phase of my plan. Ryan thought he'd eliminated the one obstacle between him and $30 million. But what he'd actually done was create an enemy with unlimited resources and nothing left to lose. My son had always been smart, but he'd never been as smart as he thought he was. And he'd certainly never been as smart as his supposedly simple mother, who'd spent 43 years learning how criminals think by watching them on television. It was time to start my investigation into Ryan Foster's business dealings, his financial situation, and most importantly, his relationship with a man named Marcus, who charged $200,000 to make problems disappear. Because if I was going to destroy my son's life the way he'd tried to destroy mine, I needed to understand exactly what kind of man he'd become when I wasn't watching. Wednesday morning found me sitting in my rental car outside Ryan's construction company, watching workers arrive for their shifts. Foster and Associates occupied a converted warehouse on the outskirts of Springfield with expensive equipment parked in the lot, and Ryan's black pickup truck in the reserved space near the main entrance. From the outside, it looked like a successful business, but I'd spent enough years balancing books to know that appearances could be deceiving, especially in an industry where cash flow problems could sink even profitable companies. I waited until Ryan arrived at 8 a.m., then followed him at a distance as he stopped at a coffee shop downtown. Perfect opportunity to do some reconnaissance while he was safely occupied. Foster and Associates had a small office staff, and I'd done my homework on each of them. The receptionist was a young woman named Jennifer who'd worked there for 6 months. The bookkeeper was an older man named Tom Peterson who'd been with the company for 3 years. I walked into the office wearing the kind of professional outfit that made me invisible. Gray suit, sensible shoes, clipboard in hand, the universal uniform of someone conducting an official survey. Good morning. I'm with the Better Business Bureau conducting a routine survey of local construction companies for our annual report. Would you have a few minutes to answer some questions about business practices in the industry? Jennifer looked uncertain. I'd have to check with Mr. Foster, but he's not in the office right now. That's fine. These are general questions about industry standards, not specific company information. Completely confidential, of course. For the next 20 minutes, I chatted with Jennifer and Tom, asking the kind of bland questions that would bore anyone to death while listening carefully for useful information. Most of what I learned was routine. Normal business operations, standard payment schedules, typical client complaints. But then Jennifer mentioned something interesting. The only weird thing lately is that Mr. Foster has been getting a lot of calls from someone named Marcus. He always takes those calls in his private office with the door closed. And afterwards he seems, I don't know, stressed, like whatever they're discussing isn't good news. Tom nodded. I've noticed that, too. Usually Mr. Foster is pretty easygoing. But after those Marcus calls, he gets snappy with everyone. How long has this been going on? I asked, keeping my tone casual. Maybe 2 months. Jennifer looked at Tom for confirmation. Yeah, about that long. 2 months, right around the time Ryan would have been planning my murder. I thanked them for their time and left, my mind racing. Whatever relationship Ryan had with Marcus, it was causing him stress. That suggested either blackmail or debt, both possibilities that could be useful for my purposes. My next stop was the Springfield Public Library, where I spent the afternoon using their computers to research Marcus Thompson. The only Marcus I could find connected to the kind of services Ryan had been shopping for. Marcus Thompson had an interesting history. 3 arrests for assault, 1 conviction for extortion that resulted in 18 months in prison, and current employment as security consultant for a company called Midwest Protection Services. Midwest Protection Services was the kind of business that didn't advertise in the yellow pages. Their website was minimalist, offering discreet security solutions for sensitive situations and risk management consultation for high net worth individuals. In other words, they were criminals with business cards. I printed out everything I could find about Marcus and his company, then cross-referenced their known associates with local criminal records. What emerged was a picture of organized crime, trying to look respectable, loan sharking, intimidation, and yes, occasional elimination of problems that couldn't be solved through traditional channels. The question was, how had Ryan gotten connected to these people? Thursday evening, I followed Ryan from his office to a bar called Murphy's on the south side of town. Not his usual kind of place. Murphy's was a working-class establishment where construction workers and factory employees went to drink beer and complain about their bosses. I waited 30 minutes, then entered wearing jeans and a baseball cap, looking like any other tired woman stopping for a drink after a long day. Ryan was sitting in a corner booth with 2 men I didn't recognize. From the body language, it wasn't a friendly conversation. I ordered a beer and found a spot at the bar where I could observe without being obvious about it. Ryan looked nervous, constantly checking his phone and fidgeting with his keys. One of the men with him, tall, broad-shouldered, expensive suit that didn't match the venue, was doing most of the talking. Marcus, I presumed. I couldn't hear their conversation over the bar noise, but I could read Ryan's expressions. Fear, frustration, desperation. Whatever they were discussing, Ryan wasn't happy about it. After 45 minutes, the meeting ended abruptly. Marcus and his companion left first, followed a few minutes later by Ryan. I waited another 10 minutes, then followed Ryan's route home, curious about his state of mind. But instead of going home, Ryan drove to a liquor store, bought a bottle of bourbon, and sat in his truck in the parking lot for 20 minutes, drinking and staring at his phone. This was not the behavior of a man celebrating his successful business ventures. Friday morning brought devastating news that I watched unfold from my hotel room in Milwaukee. The local Springfield television station led their morning broadcast with a story about ongoing investigations into several suspicious deaths in the area. Police are looking into possible connections between 3 apparent accidents involving elderly residents who died shortly after coming into significant money. The reporter announced sources close to the investigation tell us that families of the victims had all recently consulted with the same financial planning service. The story included photos of 3 people I didn't recognize, but the details were disturbingly familiar. An 83-year-old man who'd inherited his brother's farm and died in a fall down his basement stairs 2 weeks later. A 79-year-old woman who'd won a smaller lottery prize and died in a house fire the following month. A 75-year-old widow whose pension settlement arrived just before she suffered a fatal heart attack that doctors couldn't explain. All 3 families had used Midwest Financial Planning Services to help manage their sudden windfalls. Midwest Financial Planning Services, I discovered through more library research, was owned by Marcus Thompson. The scope of what I was dealing with suddenly became much larger. This wasn't just about my son hiring someone to kill me for my lottery winnings. This was about an organized operation that targeted elderly people who came into money, then eliminated them after their families paid for the service. Ryan hadn't just hired a hitman. He'd gotten involved with serial killers who specialized in inheritance fraud. The news report mentioned that police were asking family members of the victims to come forward with any information about unusual circumstances surrounding their relatives' deaths. I picked up my phone and dialed the Springfield Police Department asking to speak with Detective Sarah Morrison, who'd been quoted in the news story. "Detective Morrison, my name is Patricia Williams. I have information about the cases you're investigating involving elderly victims and Midwest Financial Planning Services." "What kind of information, Miss Williams?" "I believe my sister Margaret Foster was their most recent victim. She won $30 million in the lottery last week and died in a boat accident 3 days later. Her son Ryan had been in contact with Marcus Thompson before her death." There was a long pause. "Ms. Williams, can you come in for an interview? I think we need to talk in person. I'll be there tomorrow afternoon. And Ms. Williams, if what you're telling me is accurate, you may want to consider protective custody. These people don't usually leave witnesses alive." I hung up the phone and smiled for the first time since this whole nightmare began. Ryan thought he'd committed the perfect crime, but what he'd actually done was connect himself to a criminal organization that was already under police investigation. By tomorrow evening, my dear son would discover that killing his mother was the biggest mistake he'd ever made. The $30 million betrayal. Chapters 6 to 10. Detective Sarah Morrison looked exactly like someone who'd spent 20 years dealing with the worst humanity had to offer. Tired eyes, coffee-stained desk, and the kind of skeptical expression that said she'd heard every lie imaginable. But when I walked into the Springfield Police Department Saturday afternoon and started explaining what I knew about Marcus Thompson and my sister's death, her skepticism quickly turned to intense interest. "Let me make sure I understand this correctly, Miss Williams. You believe your sister Margaret Foster was murdered by the same organization we're investigating in connection with 3 other deaths." "I don't believe it. I know it." I pulled out the folder I'd assembled with everything I'd discovered about Midwest Financial Planning Services. Ryan Foster contacted Marcus Thompson 2 months ago, 3 days after Margaret won the lottery. She conveniently died in a boat accident. The timing isn't coincidental. Detective Morrison studied the documents I'd provided, occasionally making notes. "How did you come by this information? Some of these details about phone calls and business meetings are quite specific. My sister was worried about Ryan's behavior before she died. She'd been keeping track of things that seemed unusual. The lie came easily. I'd had plenty of practice creating Patricia Williams' backstory. And you're certain about the connection to Marcus Thompson? Ryan Foster has been meeting with him regularly. I have photos of them together at Murphy's bar taken 3 days ago." I handed her the pictures I'd taken with a telephoto lens I'd rented for the occasion. Ryan's face was clearly visible, as was Marcus Thompson's distinctive profile. Detective Morrison leaned back in her chair, studying me carefully. "M. Williams, if what you're telling me is accurate, you could be in significant danger. This organization has already killed 4 people that we know of. They won't hesitate to eliminate someone who's threatening their operation. That's why I came to you instead of confronting them directly." "Good choice. I want you to stay in protective custody while we investigate this further. We've been building a case against Midwest Financial Planning for 6 months, but we haven't been able to connect Marcus Thompson directly to the deaths. Your information could be the breakthrough we need." She stood up and walked to a whiteboard covered with photos, timelines, and red string connecting various pieces of evidence. "We believe this organization targets elderly people who come into sudden wealth, lottery winners, inheritance recipients, insurance beneficiaries. They approach the families, offer financial planning services, then eliminate the elderly person after the family pays an upfront fee." "How much do they charge?" "Based on what we've been able to determine, anywhere from $50,000 to $200,000, depending on the size of the inheritance involved." $200,000. Exactly what Ryan had agreed to pay Marcus. "The brilliant part of their scheme," Detective Morrison continued, "is that the deaths look completely natural. Heart attacks, accidents, house fires, nothing that would normally trigger a homicide investigation. We only started connecting the dots when a social worker noticed that 3 of her elderly clients had died within weeks of coming into money. How long before you can arrest them? That depends on how much evidence we can gather. Ryan Foster's involvement could give us the leverage we need to flip someone inside the organization, maybe get them to testify against the leadership. I spent the next 3 hours providing everything I knew about Ryan's recent behavior, his financial situation, and his meetings with Marcus Thompson. Detective Morrison recorded our conversation and had me sign a formal statement as Patricia Williams, sister of the deceased Margaret Foster. "We'll need you to stay in town while we investigate," she told me as we wrapped up. "I'm arranging for a safe house where you can wait this out. These people play for keeps. How long do you think this will take?" "Could be days. Could be weeks. But I promise you, Ms. Williams, if your sister was murdered, we're going to make sure her killer pays for it." That evening, in a cramped apartment that served as witness protection, I watched the local news coverage of the investigation. The story had exploded over the weekend with reporters camping out at Midwest financial planning offices and trying to interview family members of the previous victims. Ryan's name hadn't been mentioned yet, but I knew it was only a matter of time. My phone, Patricia's phone, rang at 9 hour. "Detective Morrison, Ms. Williams, we just executed search warrants on Marcus Thompson's business and personal residences. What we found is going to blow this case wide open." "What kind of evidence?" "Client files documenting the entire operation. Names, dates, payments received, methods of elimination. Your sister's case is in there along with detailed plans for 12 other elderly targets who haven't been killed yet. 12 other potential victims. The scope of this conspiracy was staggering." "There's more," Morrison continued. "We found audio recordings of Thompson's conversations with various clients, including several with Ryan Foster. Your nephew is discussing your sister's murder in explicit detail down to the method and timing." I closed my eyes, trying to feel grief for the son I'd raised, but finding only cold satisfaction. Ryan had recorded his own confession without knowing it. "When will you arrest him?" "Tomorrow morning. We want to get him before he realizes how much evidence we have. The whole organization is going down. Thompson, his associates, and every client who paid for these services." After Morrison hung up, I sat in the safe house apartment, staring out the window at the street where my son would be arrested in less than 12 hours. Part of me wanted to be there to see his face when he realized that his simple murder plot had connected him to the biggest criminal conspiracy in Illinois state history. But the rational part of me knew that Patricia Williams needed to stay hidden while Margaret Foster's killer was brought to justice. I poured myself a glass of wine from the bottle I'd picked up earlier and raised it in a toast to my reflection in the window. "Here's to you, Margaret Foster. Your death is about to be avenged in ways your son never imagined." The woman in the reflection smiled back, and for the first time since this nightmare began, I felt genuinely optimistic about the future. Tomorrow, Ryan Foster would discover what happened to people who underestimated their mothers. Sunday morning brought chaos that exceeded my wildest expectations. I woke up in the safe house to find Detective Morrison's card slipped under my door with a handwritten message. "Turn on Channel 7. Ryan Foster arrested at 6 me. Call me." The news coverage was spectacular. Video of Ryan being led away in handcuffs from his house while Amanda stood in the doorway in her bathrobe, clearly having no idea what was happening. The reporter was practically vibrating with excitement as she described the massive law enforcement operation that had taken down what she called the most sophisticated elder abuse ring in Midwest history. 7 arrests were made simultaneously this morning, including Marcus Thompson, the alleged leader of Midwest Financial Planning Services, and Ryan Foster, a local construction company owner accused of hiring Thompson to murder his own mother for lottery winnings. They showed a photo of me, Margaret Foster, with the caption, "Lat victim of inheritance murder scheme." Seeing my own obituary photo on television was surreal, but also deeply satisfying. I called Detective Morrison immediately. "Ms. Williams, I hope you're watching the news. This is the biggest bust our department has ever made. What did Ryan say when you arrested him?" "He tried to deny everything at first. Claimed he'd never heard of Marcus Thompson. Then we played the audio recordings Thompson made of their conversations. He went white as a sheet and asked for a lawyer." "What about Amanda? Does she know what her husband did?" "She's in shock. Keeps insisting there must be some mistake. That Ryan would never hurt his mother. We haven't told her yet that her mother-in-law isn't actually dead. That gave me pause. When will you tell her? That depends partly on you. As Patricia Williams, you're our key witness in this case, but eventually we're going to need Margaret Foster to testify about what she overheard. The implications hit me like a truck. At some point, I was going to have to rise from the dead and confront my son in court. The thought was both terrifying and exhilarating. What happens next? Thompson and his associates are looking at multiple charges of murder, conspiracy, and fraud. Ryan's charges include conspiracy to commit murder and insurance fraud. He's looking at life in prison without parole if convicted. Life in prison. My son, who I taught to ride a bicycle and helped with homework, would spend the rest of his life behind bars because he'd tried to have me killed for money. I should have felt sadness or regret, but all I could muster was grim satisfaction. There's something else, Morrison continued. Thompson's files contained information about other criminal activities. Money laundering, loan sharking, several unsolved murders going back 5 years. This case is going to unravel a lot of other investigations. How many people were involved in the organization? At least 15 that we know of. Financial advisors, insurance investigators, medical professionals who helped fake causes of death, even a funeral director who was disposing of evidence. It was a full Irvis operation. After hanging up with Morrison, I spent the day following news coverage and checking social media for reactions from people who knew Ryan. The responses were exactly what I'd expected. Shock, disbelief, and gradually mounting anger as details emerged about the scope of his crimes. Amanda had posted a statement on Facebook. I had no knowledge of any criminal activity. I loved Margaret Foster like my own mother, and am devastated to learn what happened to her. I am cooperating fully with police and ask for privacy during this difficult time. Poor Amanda. She'd married a monster without knowing it. And now her life was falling apart on live television. Several of Ryan's employees had posted their own statements, distancing themselves from their former boss and expressing sympathy for his victims. Foster and Associates would be bankrupt within a week. Another casualty of Ryan's greed. Monday brought more developments. Detective Morrison called to tell me that Marcus Thompson had started talking, hoping to cut a deal with prosecutors. He's given us details about 11 murders over the past 3 years, including methods, timelines, and payment amounts. Your sister's case was particularly lucrative for him because of the lottery winnings. Is he providing information about other clients? Dozens of them. Apparently, there's a whole network of people who know about this service and refer potential clients to Thompson. We're looking at the biggest conspiracy case in state history. That afternoon, I made a decision that surprised even me. I drove to Springfield, carefully disguised with a wig and sunglasses, and parked across the street from Ryan's house. Amanda was home alone, sitting on the front porch with a cup of coffee, staring at the police tape that still surrounded parts of her property. She looked lost, like someone whose entire world had collapsed overnight. I felt genuinely sorry for her. Whatever Ryan's crimes, Amanda was innocent. She'd been manipulated by a man who was apparently capable of lying to everyone around him with complete conviction. After an hour of watching her, I made another impulsive decision. I walked across the street and approached her porch. "Excuse me, are you Amanda Foster?" She looked up with red swollen eyes. "Yes. Are you a reporter?" "Because I've already said everything I'm going to say about this situation." "I'm not a reporter. My name is Patricia Williams. Margaret Foster was my sister." The effect was immediate. Amanda's face crumpled, and she started crying again. "Oh God. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry about what Ryan did. I had no idea. I swear to you, I had no idea he was capable of something like this." I sat down on the porch steps beside her. "I believe you. From everything I've learned about this situation, Ryan was very good at hiding his true nature. We've been married for 8 years, Amanda said through her tears. 8 years, and I never saw any sign that he could. She couldn't finish the sentence. What kind of husband was he before all this? Loving, attentive, he always seemed so devoted to his mother. He talked about her constantly, worried about her living alone, kept saying we needed to do more to help her. Amanda shook her head in bewilderment. How could someone who seemed to care so much about his mother's welfare be planning to murder her? It was a good question, and one I'd been thinking about constantly. How had the boy I'd raised become someone capable of cold-blooded murder? Had you noticed anything unusual about his behavior recently? He'd been stressed about work, but that wasn't unusual in the construction business. And he'd been spending more time on his phone, taking calls in private, but I thought it was just business. Business, right, Amanda? I want you to know that I don't blame you for what happened. You're as much a victim in this as anyone. She looked at me with something approaching gratitude. Thank you for saying that. The newspapers are making it sound like I should have known, like I was some kind of accomplice. The newspapers don't know what they're talking about. You married a man who was skilled at deception. That's not your fault. We talked for another 30 minutes. Amanda told me about the Ryan she'd known. Seemingly devoted husband, successful businessman, man who sent flowers to his mother every birthday and called her 3 times a week to check on her. None of it squared with the man who'd calmly hired a professional killer to eliminate his mother for inheritance money. As I prepared to leave, Amanda grabbed my arm. Miss Williams, do you think Margaret suffered when they killed her? I looked into her eyes and saw genuine concern for someone she'd believed was her mother-in-law. I think it was probably very quick, I said gently. I don't think she suffered. It wasn't exactly a lie. Margaret Foster had died instantly in that boat explosion, replaced by someone harder and more determined than she'd ever been in life. Driving back to Milwaukee, I realized that my conversation with Amanda had clarified something important. Ryan hadn't always been a monster. Something had changed him, turned him into someone capable of murder for money. The question was, what had happened to transform my son into a killer? And more importantly, was there any part of the boy I'd raised left to save? By Tuesday morning, I would have my answer to both questions, and it would change everything about how I planned to handle my resurrection. Tuesday morning brought news that made me question everything I thought I knew about my son's motivations. Detective Morrison called the safe house with information that Marcus Thompson had revealed during his interrogation. Ms. Williams, we need to talk. Can you come to the station this morning? What's happened? Thompson told us something about Ryan Foster that changes the entire dynamic of this case. An hour later, I sat in Morrison's office while she played an audio recording of Marcus Thompson's confession. Ryan Foster came to me 6 months ago, not 3 weeks ago, like we originally thought. Thompson's voice crackled through the speakers. He wasn't looking to hire a killer. He was trying to warn his mother about our organization. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. What do you mean warn her? Morrison paused the recording. It gets more complicated. Listen to this. Thompson's voice continued. Foster's construction company had done work for several of our clients. He started noticing patterns. Elderly clients who hired him for home improvements then died shortly after coming into money. He put the pieces together and figured out what was happening. But the recordings, I protested. I heard him planning my murder. Keep listening. Foster threatened to go to the police unless we left his mother alone. Said he'd already warned her to be careful around financial planners who approached her unsolicited. That's when I knew he could destroy our whole operation. Morrison stopped the recording. Ms. Williams, your nephew wasn't hiring Thompson to kill his mother. He was trying to blackmail Thompson into leaving her alone. The room spun slightly. Everything I'd believed about Ryan's motivations was wrong. Then why were they discussing murder methods? Because Thompson told Ryan that if he went to the police, Margaret Foster would die anyway along with Ryan and his wife. Thompson was explaining exactly how he would kill them all if Ryan didn't cooperate. Morrison played more of the recording. I told Foster he had 2 choices. He could pay us $200,000 to guarantee his mother's safety, or he could watch his entire family disappear. He chose to pay. Ryan was being extorted, I whispered, the full scope of my mistake becoming clear. Thompson's organization had been watching Margaret Foster since she bought those lottery tickets. They knew she was a potential target regardless of what Ryan did. When Ryan discovered their operation and tried to interfere, Thompson turned him into an unwilling accomplice. I put my head in my hands trying to process this revelation. My son hadn't been planning to murder me for inheritance money. He'd been desperately trying to save my life while being blackmailed by professional killers. There's more. Morrison said gently. Thompson told us that Ryan's been liquidating his business assets to raise the money they demanded. His construction company is bankrupt because he's been paying protection money to keep you alive. How long has this been going on? 6 months. Ryan's been making payments to Thompson's organization since March, draining his savings, taking loans against his equipment, even borrowing against his house. The conversation I'd overheard at his office suddenly made sense. Ryan had been stressed about Marcus' phone calls because he was being blackmailed, not because he was planning murder. Ms. Williams, we believe Ryan Foster thought his mother was already dead when we arrested him. Thompson told him they'd taken care of the situation permanently after she won the lottery. Ryan probably thinks he failed to save her. I closed my eyes, imagining Ryan in his jail cell, believing his mother was dead because he hadn't been able to pay enough money to the criminals who threatened her. Detective Morrison, I need to tell you something. Margaret Foster isn't dead. What do you mean? I mean, she's sitting right here in your office. I'm not Patricia Williams. I'm Margaret Foster, and I've been hiding from my son for a week because I thought he was trying to have me killed. The silence in the room was deafening. Morrison stared at me for a long moment. You're telling me that you faked your own death? I overheard Ryan talking to Marcus Thompson on the phone. Based on what I heard, I thought my son was hiring someone to murder me. So I staged a boat accident and disappeared. What exactly did you hear? I replayed the conversation from Ryan's office, word for word. When I finished, Morrison nodded slowly. You heard Thompson threatening your son, not your son hiring Thompson. But without the context of the extortion, it would have sounded like a murder plot. So Ryan has been in jail for 3 days thinking I'm dead while I've been hiding from him. That's exactly what's happened. I felt sick. My son, my baby, was sitting in a jail cell, charged with murdering his mother while believing he'd failed to protect me from the criminals who'd been extorting him for months. I have to see him. I have to tell him I'm alive. Miss Foster, that's not going to be simple. Ryan Foster has been charged with conspiracy to commit murder based partly on your testimony as Patricia Williams. If you reveal that you're alive and that you misunderstood what was happening, it could complicate our case against Thompson's organization. I don't care about your case. I care about my son. I understand, but think about this carefully. Thompson's operation has killed at least 11 elderly people. If our case falls apart because our star witness turns out to be alive and our key defendant turns out to be a victim, Thompson could walk free to kill again. The ethical dilemma was staggering. If I revealed myself to save Ryan, I might destroy the case against the people who'd murdered 11 innocent elderly victims. But if I stayed hidden, my son would be convicted of trying to murder his own mother when he'd actually been trying to save her. What are my options? We could arrange for you to visit Ryan without revealing yourself to his lawyer immediately. Let you talk to him privately. Explain the situation. Figure out the best way to handle this going forward. When? This afternoon if you want. I nodded, my emotions churning between relief that Ryan wasn't a killer and horror at how badly I'd misunderstood the situation. Detective Morrison, how did I get this so wrong? Because Thompson's organization is extremely sophisticated. They specialize in making victims look like perpetrators. Ryan was supposed to look guilty if anything went wrong, which would discredit him if he tried to expose their operation. And I played right into their hands. You reacted exactly the way any mother would react after overhearing what sounded like her son planning her murder. Don't blame yourself for Thompson's manipulation. That afternoon, I sat in a visitation room at the county jail, waiting for guards to bring my son to see his supposedly dead mother. I had no idea what I was going to say to him, how to explain what I'd done, or how to apologize for believing he was capable of murder. The door opened and Ryan walked in wearing an orange jumpsuit, his hands shackled, his face gaunt from 3 days of believing his mother was dead because of his failure to protect her. When he saw me, his legs gave out completely. "Mom," he whispered, reaching toward me with shaking hands. "Mom, is that really you?" "Hello, sweetheart," I said, my voice breaking. "I'm sorry I'm late, but I'm here now, and we're going to fix this together." The conversation that followed would determine whether my son spent the rest of his life in prison, or whether we could find a way to expose the truth about what Thompson's organization had done to both of us. Arkaram, I thought you were dead. Ryan's voice was barely a whisper as he stared at me across the metal table, his shackled hands trembling. For 3 days, I've been sitting in this cell, knowing that I failed you, that I couldn't protect you from them. Ryan, I need you to tell me everything from the beginning. When did you first encounter Marcus Thompson? He took a shaky breath, looking older than his 32 years. It started in March when I was doing renovation work for Mrs. Ella Patterson. Remember her? The widow who lived on Elm Street. I nodded. I'd met Eleanor at church functions. She hired me to build a wheelchair ramp after she inherited her sister's house. While I was working there, this financial advisor showed up. Clean-cut guy, professional look, said he was there to help her invest the inheritance money properly. Marcus Thompson. No, one of his associates. But Mrs. Patterson seemed nervous around him. Kept asking me to stay while they talked. 2 weeks later, she was dead. Heart attack, the doctor said. But she'd been healthy as a horse when I knew her. Ryan's voice gained strength as he continued the story. I didn't think much of it at first. Old people have heart attacks. But then it happened again with Mr. Henderson on Oak Street. Same pattern. Inheritance money, financial advisor, sudden death. How many times did you see this pattern? 5 times over 4 months. Every single one of them had hired my company for home improvements right before they died. Every single one had recently come into money, and every single one had been visited by these financial planning people. I watched my son's face as he spoke, seeing the pain and fear he'd been carrying for months. When did you realize it was murder? When I started researching the deaths online. 5 elderly people in the same neighborhood, all dead within weeks of inheriting money. All clients of Midwest Financial Planning Services. It couldn't be coincidental. So you contacted Marcus Thompson. Ryan nodded miserably. I thought I was being smart. I called their office and said I had information about potential fraud involving their clients. Thompson agreed to meet me. What did you tell him? Everything. I laid out the whole pattern, showed him my documentation, told him I was planning to go to the police. Ryan laughed bitterly. I thought I was being a responsible citizen reporting criminal activity. But Thompson didn't react the way you expected. He listened to everything I had to say, then calmly informed me that I just confessed to helping them identify vulnerable targets. Said my construction records were how they'd been choosing their victims. The implications hit me like a physical blow. Your client list. Thompson's people had been monitoring my business for months, using my customer database to identify elderly clients who'd recently inherited money. They'd been following my work trucks to find potential targets. Ryan, this isn't your fault, isn't it? Every one of those people died because I led killers to their door. Mrs. Patterson, Mr. Henderson, all of them trusted me, and I brought murderers into their lives. I reached across the table and grabbed his shackled hands. You didn't know. You couldn't have known. But I should have figured it out sooner. Should have gone to the police after the second death, instead of trying to investigate myself. What did Thompson want from you? Silence. Complete cooperation. He told me that if I went to the police or stopped providing client information, they'd kill everyone I cared about, starting with you. The pieces finally clicked into place. That's why you were under so much stress, why you were liquidating business assets. Thompson demanded $200,000 to guarantee your safety. Said, as long as I paid and kept quiet, you'd be left alone. But then you won the lottery. Ryan's voice broke completely. $30 million made you the biggest target they'd ever identified. Thompson told me the protection deal was off, that you were too valuable to pass up. Said they'd eliminate you within days unless I paid them $5 million. $5 million. No wonder Ryan had seemed desperate in those final conversations. I tried to liquidate everything, the business, the house, our savings, but I could only raise about $400,000. It wasn't enough. So Thompson decided to kill me anyway. He told me they'd make it look accidental, that you'd never know what was happening. Said if I tried to warn you or interfere, they'd torture you before they killed you. Then come after Amanda. I stared at my son, seeing clearly for the first time the impossible position he'd been trapped in for months. Ryan, the conversation I overheard at your house when you were talking about making it look natural, about car accidents and timing. That was Thompson explaining how they were going to kill you. He wanted me to understand exactly what would happen if I didn't cooperate fully. He was describing their methods, not asking for my input. You were never planning to have me murdered. Mom, I would die before I'd let anyone hurt you. I've been going crazy trying to figure out how to protect you from these people. The guard appeared at the door, signaling that visiting time was nearly over. Ryan, there's something you need to know. I'm not just visiting you as your mother. I've been working with Detective Morrison to build a case against Thompson's organization. His eyes widened. What do you mean? I faked my death, Ryan. When I thought you were trying to have me killed, I staged a boat accident and disappeared. I've been feeding information to the police as Patricia Williams, Margaret Foster's sister. You've been alive this whole time. I've been hiding from you this whole time, thinking you wanted me dead. But now I know the truth, and we're going to use that truth to destroy Thompson and everyone like him. How? Because Thompson's organization just made their biggest mistake. They tried to turn a mother against her son, not realizing that we're stronger together than either of us is alone. The guard stepped forward. Time's up. I stood, but Ryan remained seated, staring at me with something I hadn't seen in his eyes since he was a child. Hope. Mom, what happens now? Now we fight back, sweetheart. Together, Thompson wanted to make you look like a killer, and me look like a victim. Instead, we're going to make sure he spends the rest of his life in prison. As I left the visitation room, I was already planning the next phase of our counterattack. Thompson had manipulated and threatened my family for months, using our love for each other as a weapon against us. But he'd made one crucial error in judgment. He'd assumed that love makes people weak. He was about to learn that nothing in this world is more dangerous than a mother whose child is threatened. Tucker. 3 weeks later, I sat in the front row of the courtroom as Marcus Thompson was sentenced to life in prison without possibility of parole. The judge's words echoed through the packed gallery. Mr. Thompson, your organization's systematic targeting and murder of vulnerable elderly citizens represents one of the most heinous criminal enterprises in this court's history. But the real victory had come 2 days earlier. When Ryan walked out of jail as a free man, all charges dropped after the truth about Thompson's extortion scheme became public knowledge. The media had turned our story into a sensation. Son saves mother from murder plot. Fake death exposes killer ring. Family love defeats criminal conspiracy. While I appreciated the positive coverage, what mattered most to me was sitting next to Ryan and Amanda in that courtroom, watching justice being served to the man who tried to destroy our family. Detective Morrison had been right about the scope of Thompson's operation. The final investigation revealed 17 murders over 5 years with dozens of attempted extortion cases like Ryan's. Thompson's associates received sentences ranging from 25 years to life, effectively dismantling the entire organization. Miss Foster, the voice belonged to Jennifer Walsh, a reporter from the Chicago Tribune who'd been covering the trial. Could I ask you a few questions about your experience? I looked at Ryan, who nodded encouragingly. We'd discussed this, using media attention to warn other families about similar schemes. What would you want people to know about organizations like Thompson's? Jennifer asked. That they prey on our love for each other. I said, choosing my words carefully. They identify the people we care most about, then use our desire to protect them as a weapon against us. The only defense is communication and trust. What do you mean by that? If Ryan and I had talked openly about what was happening instead of each trying to protect the other in secret, Thompson never would have been able to manipulate us. Family members need to share their fears and suspicions even when it's uncomfortable. Jennifer scribbled notes. What advice would you give to families who might be targeted by similar schemes? Trust your instincts. If financial advisors or insurance salespeople approach you immediately after you receive inheritance money, be suspicious. Legitimate businesses don't typically cold call lottery winners or inheritance recipients. And if you suspect your family is being targeted, go to the police immediately. Don't try to handle it yourself. Don't try to pay off criminals. Don't assume you can outsmart professional con artists. Law enforcement has resources and experience that private citizens don't have. After the interview, Ryan, Amanda, and I walked to my car in the courthouse parking garage. The underground space was dimly lit and echoing with the sound of our footsteps, creating an oddly intimate atmosphere for the conversation I'd been planning. Ryan, there's something we need to discuss about the lottery money. He stopped walking. Mom, I don't want any of it. After everything that's happened, I never want to see a penny of that money. I figured you'd feel that way, which is why I've already made arrangements. I handed him an envelope containing legal documents I'd prepared with my attorney. What's this? A trust fund for your future children. $20 million that can only be accessed for education, healthcare, and housing expenses for the next generation of our family. Ryan opened the envelope and stared at the documents. Mom, this is too much. It's exactly the right amount. The money can't be touched by you or Amanda, which protects it from anyone who might try to manipulate you in the future. But it ensures that our grandchildren will have opportunities neither of us could have imagined. Amanda was crying again. But these were happy tears. Margaret, you don't have to do this. Yes, I do. Family takes care of each other, but not by enabling dependency or creating targets for criminals. This way, the money serves its proper purpose. What about the remaining $10 million? Ryan asked. $5 million is going into my retirement account, which should be more than enough for a comfortable life. The other $5 million is being donated to organizations that help elderly people avoid financial exploitation. We reached my car and I turned to face my son and daughter-in-law. Ryan, I want you to rebuild your construction company. Amanda, I want you to continue your nursing career. You're both young and talented, and you don't need lottery winnings to have a successful life together. What about you, Mom? What are your plans? I smiled, feeling genuinely excited about the future for the first time in years. I'm buying a small house in Colorado near the mountains. I'm going to learn to hike and maybe take up photography. I've spent 62 years taking care of other people. It's time I learned to take care of myself. Colorado's pretty far away. Far enough to discourage casual visits. Close enough for holidays and emergencies. We all need some space to heal from what Thompson put us through. Ryan hugged me. The first completely relaxed embrace we'd shared in months. I love you, Mom. And I'm proud of how you handled this whole situation. I love you too, sweetheart. But next time you're being blackmailed by organized criminals, please call your mother immediately. He laughed. The first genuine laugh I'd heard from him since this nightmare began. I promise. 6 months later, I was sitting on the deck of my cabin in Aspen, watching the sunrise paint the mountains gold and pink while my coffee grew cold in my hands. My phone buzzed with a text from Amanda. Baby Foster expected January 15th. Can Grandma Margaret clear her calendar for visits? I smiled and typed back. Grandma Margaret's calendar is officially cleared for all baby-related emergencies and snuggling duties. The lottery ticket that had started this whole adventure was framed on my kitchen wall, not as a celebration of wealth, but as a reminder that sometimes the most valuable prizes come disguised as disasters. I'd won $30 million, lost it, and gained something infinitely more precious. The absolute certainty that my son loved me enough to sacrifice everything to protect me. Marcus Thompson had tried to turn our family's love into a weapon. Instead, he taught us that love, real love, is the most powerful force in the universe when it's based on honesty, communication, and trust. And sometimes, just sometimes, mothers who refuse to give up can move mountains. Or at least they can move $30 million in exactly the right direction. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and feel free to share your story in the comments. Your voice matters. Music.